Tag und Grüß Gott. Today is Sunday, July 6th, 2025. So, what's in the news this last week? Well, that's a good question. I don't know what is news anymore and what is just beleaguered dialogue that people have to put out there in order to make some money, because they have to attract some advertising. All right, don't let me get into all this. Well, let me start with the most important news first. The most important news is that yesterday, Black Sabbath had their final concert in Birmingham, actually, the UK. So, they also had, I think, Guns N' Roses there, Metallica, and I think some other bands. But in any way, this was basically put out there as Black Sabbath's last and final concert. And, actually brought the band together after 20 years. It's the first time they've actually been together. And and the Ozzy Osbourne, was sitting on a throne somewhere. I wish I could have seen it, and maybe I'll see a video on that sometime. Now, I'm not bringing this up because Black Sabbath is my favorite band, but they clearly were influential in the 70s, for some of the bands that came after them. Of course, what I will never forget is Ozzy Osbourne going on stage, and biting the head off a vampire mouse, and that kind of thing. I can't think of the word right now. Yeah, okay, it's bat, but in Germany, what I wanted to say was Fledermaus. You see, the English word is bat, and Fledermaus is the German word for bat, which is kind of crazy. And of course, the Germans, don't consider it a mouse, but hey, there is that word. Anyway, so yeah, poor Ozzy, though, is struck with Parkinson's, and so he did perform, though, from what I understand. So maybe we'll see some sort of a video from that event, and if we can see, the other bands perform as well. I might just look at it. I'm not a great rock and roll fan, but, I watched Ozzy Osbourne, kind of being ditzy, on TV here and there, like Where Am I, that kind of thing. And, of course, most of it is probably an act, but I do wish him well. And who knows, maybe that wasn't the last concert. Maybe they decided, after 20-some years, say, hey, this ain't so bad. Maybe we'll just have another reunion concert. You never know what happens in the future. But anyway, that's what went on. Was it big news? Well, yeah, Black Sabbath, after all, right? So what else is in the news? Of course, Elon Musk is in the news. Elon Musk is going to start the American Party, as his protest, for the big, beautiful bill that President Trump was able to get passed, and I guess he already signed it. And Elon Musk's point is that, hey, we're trying to save all this money, reduce our debt of the country, and, our debt is like $2 trillion, and the big, beautiful bill is like $2.5 trillion, and it goes against Elon's grain, and, he's really pissed, I think, maybe. But anyway, I don't know whether he'll get his wish, to make a third party, and he might, because, they keep saying he's the richest man in the world. Of course, the Rothschilds are probably snickering, he thinks he's the richest man in the world. Yeah, right. Yeah, anyway, so so here we are, with the titans are fighting each other, and of course, when really big people, make the news, then there's only the news about big people, like Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Bezos, Bezos' wedding. Which he had just now. He bought Venice, evidently, and had a wedding there. But you know what? He's not political. He's not like Elon, saying, Trump is full of shit or something. I'm not sure he said that, actually. But, they're really going at it right now. But anyway, you know, Ozzy Osbourne, let me just get back to this a little bit. You know, I diverge, you know, and that's my privilege on doing my own videos. I can diverge. I'm not sure that's actually a word, you know, diverge, maybe. Anyway, you know, maybe he should have, you know, looked at the diets of Keith Richards or Mick Jagger, you know, because they're really doing well, you know. I mean, you know, all these guys were doing drugs and, you know, but here is poor Ozzy Osbourne with Parkinson. Holy crap, you know. So evidently he didn't look at, you know, what the other guys were doing, you know. Keith Richards, you know, looks like he's basically half dead, you know, but he plays that guitar, you know, with that arthritic hand, you know. Jesus Christ. And Mick Jagger, crap, you know, he just jumps around the stage. I don't even know how old he is, but Ozzy Osbourne was 76, you know, and it's really too bad. Of course, I'm 85, you know, so these guys are all youngsters to me, right? Okay. Well, this month I'm going to be 86. Holy shit, how the hell did that ever happen? Anyway, so yeah, you know, the press, of course, the mainstream media, you know, hates Elon Musk, you know, so they publicize everything that they can that is negative about Elon Musk because, you know, it helps the Democrats, you know, it helps the party, you know, and they're all liberal, commie, left-leaning. I don't know what I should call them, but I'm sure they're looking at us as Nazis, you know, right extremists, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And we're neither, you know. Who the hell wants extremism on either end, you know? We're kind of middle-of-the-road guys, you know, or at least I'm a middle-of-the-road guy, I think. But, you know, right now in America, there is no middle of the road. You know, you're either left or you're right, you know. It just seems to be that way right now. You know, unless Elon Musk, you know, comes up with the middle in the American party. But, you know, we've seen that before, back in '92, you know, when Bush and Clinton ran against each other. And who was the spoiler there? Ross Perot, you know. He was also a spoiler at General Motors, you know. He bought a bunch of their stock, got on a board, you know, and taught them efficiency, you know. He was probably the first one, you know, to do, you know, really efficiency identification and cost reduction. And he gave General Motors fits, you know, because his slogan was, you find a snake, you kill the snake. You know, I mean, simple as that, right? Yeah. Anyway, Ross Perot didn't make it as a candidate for either party or anything like this. All he did is handed Clinton the win. Okay. So maybe the Democrats are jumping up and down with glee right now. Oh, go Elon, you know, do that third party because we know we can, you know, beat the next Republican candidate. Anyway. So what else is going on? Well, the Ukraine, you know, so we celebrated the Ukraine in the press. We celebrated the Ukraine, you know, incredible, well-planned attack on Russia and their 40 planes that were sitting on the, you know, out in the open, and they were damaged. Well, those planes, you know, are out there actually for a really good reason because they are part of what what is called the START Treaty, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, and you know. It was a treaty between the two superpowers, you know, Russia and the United States at the time, you know, when they said, you know, when Russia kind of, you know, fell apart, everybody said, you know, hey, you guys, you know, with all those strategic arms, you know, you need to do something, you know, about reducing it in order to reduce accidents, you know. So they came up with this START. And, you know, Boris Yeltsin signed it and Clinton signed it. I think I'm trying to say Lee Major, but the UK president who was Major, his name was Major something, you know, also signed it. And so they all agreed, you know, that we ought to do that. And and it included inspections, and that's the reason, these planes were out there, so that we can see them with satellites. Of course, they can see ours in the Arizona desert as well. But here's the thing, back in 2023, Russia said, well, you know what? We don't want to have much to do with START anymore, because we're not going to allow you to inspect, what we have in terms of strategic arms. And of course, that was already a year into the Ukraine war, So, so maybe, at first I thought, well, Ukraine was so clever and so forth to destroy those planes, and then, somebody mentioned START, and I said, oh crap, So now we're not going to do treaties anymore like that or adhere to them, and sure enough. It turns out that Russia, has already backed out, and that's the reason probably the Ukrainians were able to, with impunity, to destroy all those planes, So I guess the Russians backed out, and they weren't quick enough on the trigger to hide their planes, But now, those treaties, including the Budapest Treaty in '94, because the Budapest Treaty sort of guaranteed Ukraine's independence. And I mean sort of, it's because what Russia and, the nations of NATO agreed on, basically, is that, those countries that have a nuclear arsenal, like Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, maybe some others, they're going to give that up. But for them giving up the arsenals, they are assured that they have independence. They can do their own elections, do their own business. They're not going to be attacked and everything. So all of that has kind of gone out the window, with the Crimean situation, where the Russians just kind of walked into Ukraine, and took the Crimean peninsula. I guess it's a peninsula. Yeah, it is a peninsula. Which is a vacation spot for Europe because it's got that Mediterranean climate, palm trees, the whole thing, which is really a kind of nice place. We've always heard about people visiting the Crimea. The Germans call it the Krim, of course we call it Crimea. And, I'm struggling between speaking German and English, and I'm not good at either one of them anymore, it just seems like. Anyway. So the treaties, are just kind of for naught now, But I'm still ticked off at Biden, because the Budapest Accord was still in place, when he when Putin invaded the Ukraine, and Biden didn't do anything about it, So the Ukrainians were just kind of sitting there, And fortunately, they kind of armed up a little bit, and so they were able to repel, the initial wave, of the Russians. But you know what? The Russians keep plugging away. They basically have the Donbass, taken back. They're taking parts of, other parts of Ukraine, especially in the northern area, which is evidently populated mostly by Russians. And of course, their reason for going into the Ukraine is, well, those Ukrainians are suppressing our people. There are a bunch of Russians there, Doesn't that sound familiar? You know why it should sound familiar? Because this is the kind of reason that was given, when they invaded Poland. Those Poland, Hitler and the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939, shortly after I was born. I was born in July, they invaded in September. And they invaded Poland because, those Germans living there were being oppressed, and being, and I tell you what, my parents never felt like they were being oppressed. And maybe they were, but they never talked about any oppression or anything like this. But they were scared as hell, when the German invasion happened because, my mom had to take me out into the countryside. My dad stayed in the city. And, with our stuff, in case he had to defend it, we had guns, right? So, anyway, and he was a German citizen, so it went well for him, so ultimately. But nevertheless, you know, the bombs didn't know the difference between Poles and Germans, you know, and that's the reason, you know, my mom and I went into the country, and you know, hoping that we would be spared. You know, I've talked about this many times, you know, but I'm going to keep mentioning it because, hey, war is hell, you know, and I want to talk about war because I'm a child of war. I experienced war. I experienced occupation. I experienced the horrors of it. I experienced, you know, all of the alarms and all the invasions of airplanes and all that kind of stuff, you know, and you know, maybe that's why I'm so crazy now, you know, who knows? All right. Well, the good part of today's news is that, you know, there may be something happening in the Middle East, you know, that might be good because Israel and Hamas are actually talking. You know, Israel and Hamas are actually talking. Now, I'm not sure how the Iranians figure into this, but there's going to be a meeting, and it may be happening right now in Qatar, where Israel and Hamas are trying to work out some sort of a ceasefire. I mean, right now there's actually a ceasefire in place already, but you know, maybe they're going to come up with some way of working together, because that would really be something, and it would clearly piss off the Iranians, because the Iranians have been fostering all this dissent and aggravation in the Middle East, because, you know, their Shia religion, you know, says, hey, you know, the what do they call it? The hidden prophet, you know, will return. It's like a resurrection of the hidden prophet, you know, after Israel is defeated, you know, and when Israel is defeated, there will be peace on earth, and the hidden imam will appear. So they're working hard, you know, to defeat Israel. So if there's something going on with Hamas and Israel, you know, that is kind of a, you know, coexistence kind of a thing, well, that's going to piss the Iranians off, you know, unless there's a government change, you know, and the Ayatollahs, you know, losing their voice, you know, but we never know. All right. So Ozzy Osbourne, you're screwed up. You know, you should have eaten more garlic. Talking about garlic, my wife still doesn't have a toothache. Anyway, I hope you had as much fun as I did, you know, doing this. So I bid you farewell, auf Wiedersehen, and so long.